She set her glass down carefully on the nearest surface and looked at her husband, as though she needed a moment to consider what he had said. She did not need a moment. She had understood it immediately. The words had been simple enough, delivered in the same measured tone Theron Grafton used when he signed contracts and dismissed staff who had failed him. "I believe this arrangement has run its course," he had said, loud enough for the Pembroke dining room to carry it to every corner. "I think we both know it has not been what it ought to be." 30 people heard it. Cressida counted them later in the carriage. A strange accounting she could not stop herself from making. 30 people, crystal chandeliers, the smell of roasted duck and beeswax candles, and Georgiana Hartwell standing 2 feet behind Theron's left shoulder, with an expression she had almost managed to make look like concern. Cressida looked at her husband for a long moment. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at things she was about to leave, fully, so she would not later wish she had seen them more clearly. "As you say, Mr. Grafton," she said. She did not make a scene. This was Philadelphia in 1858, not a ballroom in a novel, and she was not performing for an audience she intended to address. She simply turned and walked out of the Pembroke dining room, through the front hall, past the footman, who held the door with the carefully arranged expression of a man who had heard everything and would say nothing, and down the stone steps into the October night. The air hit her first, cold, with the particular smell of autumn in the city, coal smoke and fallen leaves, and something that reminded her, oddly, of her mother's garden in Connecticut. She breathed it in. Her carriage was already at the far end of the street. Cormac saw her coming alone and stood up on the box without asking a question. "Home," she said, "just me." He did not ask about Mr. Grafton. She had been married to Theron for 3 years and 4 months. She had kept that count in the same part of her mind where she kept the household accounts and the date of every servant's birthday, and the names of his business clients' wives, which she had memorized because Theron never seemed to remember them, and she had learned early that his professional life ran more smoothly when she quietly supplied what he could not. She had not gone into the marriage without hope. She had been 24, the daughter of a well-regarded Hartford attorney, and Theron Grafton had been presented to her as a man of business and ambition, decent in his habits, not cruel. Her father had approved. Her mother, who had died the previous winter, had not been there to say what she thought, which Cressida had since decided was probably a mercy. The first year had contained something like warmth. Theron had brought her a small volume of verse in the 3rd week of their courtship, inscribed with his name in his angular hand. He had asked, once, whether she preferred the countryside or the city. He had listened to the answer, or appeared to. That version of him felt, looking back, like a suit of clothes that hadn't quite fit, something put on for a particular occasion, and quietly returned to the wardrobe afterward. By the 2nd year, she had mapped the geography of their arrangement, which topics he would engage with and which he would not, which silences meant thinking and which meant dismissal, how to present a problem so it did not sound like a problem. She had learned that the household ran on decisions he believed he was making, most of which she had already made and arranged for him to approve. She had learned this without being told. Georgiana Hartwell had appeared on the edges of their social life by the middle of that 2nd year. A widow of comfortable means, who laughed at Theron's observations and had a talent for looking at a man as though he were the only interesting thing in a room. Cressida had noticed. She had not said anything. She had told herself she was being ungenerous. She had been wrong about that. She packed that night. Mrs. Vickers, the housekeeper, appeared at the bedroom door within 20 minutes of Cressida's return, took one look at her face, and asked no questions whatsoever. "I'll be packing tonight," Cressida said. "Only what's mine?" "I'll help," said Mrs. Vickers, who had been with the household since before Cressida arrived, and who had, in 3 years, developed the specific loyalty of a woman who can tell the difference between a household that runs well and a household that one person has quietly made to run well. They worked in near silence until past 1 in the morning. Cressida was methodical about it. She took her mother's silver comb from the dressing table and the small oil painting of a Connecticut harbor that her father had given her as a wedding gift. She took the 3 books from the shelf that had her maiden name written inside. Lo, in her own careful hand. She took her personal correspondence and the household ledger she had maintained for 38 months, not as evidence, simply as a record that was entirely her work, and therefore entirely hers. She did not take the volume of verse Theron had given her in the 3rd week of their courtship. She left it on the corner of the writing desk, cover upward, his handwriting visible on the inside page. She stood and looked at it for a moment before she left the room. She had thought she might feel the need to explain that choice. She didn't. Some things did not need explaining. The leaving of them was the whole sentence. By 2 in the morning, it was 2 trunks. 3 years and 4 months, reduced to 2 trunks, and a letter she had written in 5 sentences, which she left on the desk beside the book. She had a great deal more she could have said. She did not say it. Cormac drove her out of Philadelphia in the dark. She watched the city lights thin and disappear as they moved north toward the countryside where her mother's sister, Clementine Birch, lived in a farmhouse she had built into a life over 15 years of widowhood. It was the only place that made sense. Clementine had said it to her once at her wedding, leaning close with the directness she had always possessed. "If you ever need somewhere to come to me." Cressida had not known what to do with that at the time. She had been a bride. She had believed in the thing she was beginning. She thought about that for most of the drive north. Theron came home to a quiet house and told himself she would reconsider by morning. She did not reconsider. He found the letter, 5 sentences. She had signed it with her maiden name, Cressida Lowe, and he stood with the paper in his hand long enough that his coffee went cold. "I have accepted your decision. I have taken only what belonged to me before this marriage. The household accounts are current. Mrs. Vickers knows the arrangements through the end of the month. I wish you well." No anger in them. That was the part that stayed with him. The first day, he noticed the supper was slightly wrong, not badly made, just not quite right in some quality he couldn't name. It took him until the second day to understand that Cressida had been quietly supervising the kitchen for 3 years, and he had never once thought to notice until she wasn't there to do it. The third day, he spent 40 minutes searching for a contract file before finding it exactly where it should have been. In a system so orderly it might have been architectural. He stood with the file in his hands and thought about the woman who had built that system and maintained it without being asked and without being thanked, and he stood there for a long time. By the end of the first week, the social accounting had begun. Reuben Price came by on a Thursday, ostensibly about a shipping matter, and mentioned with the careful indirection of a man working up to an honest opinion that there was quite a lot of talk in the city. "What kind of talk?" Theron said. "The kind," Reuben said, "where people who attended the Pembroke dinner have since formed a view of what happened there, and are sharing it freely." He looked at Theron directly. "The view is not favorable to you." "I didn't ask for the room's opinion." "No," Reuben said, "and that, if you want my honest assessment, is a significant part of the problem." He set his hat on the table. She was well liked, Theron, not in the polite way, in the way where people actually mean it. "And what you did in that dining room, it was seen." "I acted on information." "What information?" Theron was silent. "Whose information?" Reuben said. It was that question that sent Theron back to Georgiana. He arrived at her house on a Tuesday and did not accept the tea she offered. He stood in her front parlor and asked, plainly and without preamble, what exactly she had told him about Cressida, and the man she had been seen with in September, and when and from whom she had heard it. Georgiana performed surprise. She was skilled at it. But Theron had had 11 days of quiet in his house to think about the shape of what had happened, and he had gotten very precise in his thinking. "Her cousin," he said, before she finished her third sentence. "His name is Foster Lowe. He came to Philadelphia in September to sign estate documents relating to her father's property. I have confirmed this with 2 separate parties who were present. He is her cousin." He watched her face. "You told me otherwise." She tried 2 more angles before she stopped. He did not raise his voice. He simply said what he had come to say, and when he was done, he told her he would ask her not to call or correspond again, and he left. He sat in his carriage afterward, and thought about what he had just confirmed. Cressida had done nothing. She had never done anything. For 3 years and 4 months, she had run his house, maintained his accounts, supported his professional life, and managed his social world with a skill he had never acknowledged. And she had done all of it while he looked past her, at a woman who had handed him a story he had been willing to believe because it was convenient to believe it. That was the part that sat in his chest like a coal. Not that he had been deceived, that he had been ready to be deceived. He had wanted a reason. He had not examined that want honestly until now, and examining it now was not a comfortable thing. Clementine Birch's farmhouse was small and orderly, and smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. Cressida arrived just before dawn on the second morning of her journey and was met at the door by a woman of 60 who looked at her face, moved aside, and put the kettle on. "However long you need," Clementine said. That was the whole of the conversation about it. Cressida slept for 11 hours. When she woke, there was work to do, and she did it. She reorganized Clementine's still room, which had been in disarray since summer. She wrote 3 letters on Clementine's behalf to suppliers, and a 4th to a distant relation whose response had been needed for 2 months. On her 4th day, she found a girl of 11, sitting on the front step with a primer in her lap, and a look of concentrated frustration on her face. The girl's name was Tess. She was the daughter of a neighboring farmhand, serious-eyed and quietly stubborn, and she had apparently decided that reading was something that was going to happen for her, and was simply waiting for the right person to help it along. "What are you stuck on?" Cressida asked. Tess showed her. "Come inside," Cressida said. "We'll start from where you are." By the end of the 2nd week, Tess was coming every morning. By the end of the 3rd, she had worked through half the primer with the focused determination of someone who understands that the thing being offered is worth the work of receiving it. Cressida found, each morning when Tess arrived, that something in her chest settled, not healed, but settled, the way a dislocated thing settles when it has been moved back into alignment. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, at the patient-attending kind of teaching that made people feel not managed but seen. She had been doing it inside the Grafton house for 3 years, and had felt, increasingly, like water poured into sand. All the effort, nothing remaining. Out here, something remained. Clementine watched all of this without comment. One evening in the 3rd week, when the lamp was low and the work was done, she said, without looking up from the mending she was doing, "Your mother was quiet too, you know." Cressida looked at her. "She thought silence protected her," Clementine said. "It protected her from some things, not from being misread." She set down her mending and looked at Cressida directly. "A quiet woman becomes whatever the room decides to make of her. People fill the silence with whatever is convenient for them." Cressida thought about Georgiana Hartwell. She thought about 3 years of not saying what she noticed and not raising what she felt, because she had learned quickly that raising it made things harder, and she had valued the peace of the house more than she had valued being heard. "I mistook silence for safety," she said. "Most women do," Clementine said, "until they discover it wasn't." She wrote a letter the next morning. Not to Theron. To Dr. Theodore Abernathy, who had been her father's closest friend in the years before his death, and who had been present at the Pembroke dinner, and who had looked at her in that dining room with an expression she had read at the time as pity and was now reconsidering as something closer to anger on her behalf. She stated only facts. She asked for nothing except his willingness to know the truth of her character and conduct, plainly stated, without argument or intermediary. She sealed it and gave it to Cormac, who had stayed. Theron came to Clementine's on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after Cressida had arrived. No letter first. She heard the horse on the road and then Clementine's voice at the door. She was at the kitchen table working through a passage with Tess. She stayed where she was. She finished the paragraph. She asked Tess to read the last 3 sentences again on her own. Then she went to the door. He looked like a man who had not slept particularly well in 3 weeks. He had ridden himself, no driver, no companion. He was in plain clothes, and he had taken off his hat before knocking, which she noticed. "Cressida," he said. "Mr. Grafton," she said. She did not invite him in. She stepped out. This was her door, in a house where she was wanted for exactly what she was, and she was not going to give the conversation to him by default. They stood in the yard in the October chill. He told her he had spoken to Georgiana. He told her he had confirmed the truth about Foster Lowe. He told her he had sat with that truth for 3 weeks and understood, slowly and at some cost to his pride, not only that he had been deceived, but that he had been ready to be deceived, that he had wanted a reason and had not examined that want honestly until it was too late. She let him finish. Then she said, "I kept things from you as well." He looked at her. "Not lies. I never lied to you." She held his gaze. "But I kept my unhappiness and my observations and my very real concerns to myself, because I had learned quickly that expressing them made things harder. I kept quiet about Georgiana because I thought you would hear jealousy. I kept quiet about how invisible I felt because I thought you would hear complaint. I made myself smaller every year, and told myself it was patience. It wasn't. It was fear, and that is partly my own responsibility." He was looking at her as though he was seeing something for the first time, which he probably was. She had never stood in front of him like this before, just stood, solid and clear-eyed and present, and said the actual truth without packaging it first. "I am not telling you that to reduce your share of this," she said. "You had a considerable share of it, and more. I am telling you because we are both done with the simple version of what happened between us." A long silence. "Yes," he said. "No performance in it." "I know," she said. Dr. Abernathy convened the meeting on a Friday. He sent notes to 8 Philadelphia households and stated only that he had a matter of public record he wished to address. By Thursday afternoon, the better part of their social circle had taken note that something was happening at Abernathy's house, and was attempting to determine what. Cressida arrived with Clementine. Theron arrived separately, after the others. He came in without the social ease he usually carried into rooms full of important people. He came in the way a man comes in who has decided that ease is not the point. Dr. Abernathy spoke first. He stated the facts plainly. He said that he had reviewed the circumstances of what had occurred at the Pembroke dinner, had spoken to multiple parties, and was prepared to state for the record, in front of witnesses, that there was not a single verifiable fact to support any suggestion of impropriety on Mrs. Grafton's part. Not one. What there was, he said, was evidence of a story constructed and circulated for purposes that had nothing to do with the truth. Then he stepped aside. Theron looked at the room. He looked briefly at Cressida. Then he said what he had come to say. "What happened at the Pembroke dinner was wrong," he said. "It was wrong in what I said, and wrong in how I chose to say it, and wrong in the reasoning that led me to it. I accepted a story I had no right to accept without questioning, and I used it publicly against a woman who had done nothing to deserve it. Mrs. Grafton's character and conduct in our home and in this city have been without reproach. I am stating that here, in front of these people, because she deserves to have what was damaged in public restored in public." The room was absolutely still. Reuben Price said after a moment, "That took something, Theron." "It should have happened sooner," Theron said. He came to Clementine's 3 times after that. The first time, he brought nothing. They sat on the porch in the November cold and talked, genuinely without agenda. He told her about his father, and she understood within 10 minutes why warmth had always been difficult for him. He had been raised by a man who treated sentiment as a liability, which was not an excuse, but it was a map of the territory she had been trying to navigate without knowing its name. He laid it out like that, as a map, not a defense. She told him about Hartford, about her father's study, where she had read everything she could reach, and about arriving in Philadelphia as a new wife full of observations and finding, within the first several months, that those observations were not welcome the way she had imagined they would be. She told him this without anger. It was a fact. It had happened. She was telling it to him the way she had wanted to tell it for 3 years, plainly, because it was true. He listened. When she finished, he asked one question. What had she been reading in her father's study? She told him. It took a while to answer properly. He listened to all of it. When he left, Clementine said only, "He listened more than he talked." "Yes," Cressida said. "In my experience," Clementine said, "that is harder for men like him than most of what they would call hard." The second visit, he told her something he had been working up to saying for some time. He said he had been in his study one evening, unable to write to her, and had gone to the window, and had stood looking out at the city and understood. Not in the way a man understands when he is having a bad day, but in a real and lasting way. That he had been looking at everything he owned, and wondering whether any of it was worth what it had cost. The position, the house, the standing, whether the kind of man it had required him to be had been worth the becoming. "And then I thought about you," he said. "Not about having you back. About you specifically, the way you walked out of that dining room, the way you packed only what was yours, the letter you wrote in 5 sentences. I thought, that is what it looks like when a person knows who they are." He looked at the table between them. "I have been in rooms full of people my entire life and rarely known who I am." She did not fill the silence after that. She let it hold what it needed to hold. The third visit, he came to the door, and she could tell, before he spoke, that something had resolved in him, not in defeat, but in the particular way that resolution looks when it has actually cost something. She did not make it easier for him to say it. She had spent 3 years making things easier for him to do, and she was done with that particular habit. He asked her what she had decided. She told him. "I will not return to your house until I am certain, Not willing, not hopeful, certain that what I am returning to is genuinely different from what I left. I will make that judgment on my own terms and in my own time. She held his gaze. If we agree to try, these are the conditions, not requests. Conditions. She said them plainly. The household accounts would remain her responsibility. The correspondence would remain her responsibility. She would teach a school for the children of people who needed it. And this would be entirely her undertaking, to be run as she saw fit, without his consultation or his opinions unless she asked for them. She would speak when she had something to say, and she would not package it for his comfort. And he would hear it. If there comes a time when I speak and am not heard, she said, I will tell you directly that I have spoken and not been heard, and we will have that conversation then and there. I will not go quiet again. He sat with all of it. Then he said, just that. Just the word, without the social confidence she had spent 3 years watching him perform. A man saying yes and meaning it with everything he had. Then here is how we begin, she said. I will come back at the end of the month, not this week, at the end of the month, so that what we have just decided has time to be real before it becomes routine. And I come back as Cressida Low Grafton, both names. Both names, he said. Both names, she confirmed. She came back at the end of November. The volume of verse was still on the corner of the desk where she had left it. He had not moved it. She saw it when she walked into the study to retrieve her ledger, and she stood there looking at it for a moment, at his handwriting on the inside cover, angular and unembellished, the hand of a man not given to flourish. She picked it up. She set it on the shelf beside her own books. Not because she had forgiven the leaving of it, because the keeping of it now was a different gesture than it had been then. Mrs. Vickers greeted her return with the expression of a woman who has spent a month learning exactly how much invisible work one person had been doing and has strong feelings about the subject. She said nothing aloud. She did not need to. Tess continued her lessons. She rode the 14 miles from Clementine's farmhouse twice a week on her father's horse, because she had decided this was where her education was happening, and distance was not an argument she was prepared to accept. Cressida cleared a room on the 2nd floor and called it a schoolroom, and by January there were 7 children sitting in it on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, working through their letters, with the specific gravity of people who understand that what is being offered is worth the work of receiving it. Theron stood in the doorway one Thursday morning and watched for nearly an hour without speaking. When the children had gone and Cressida was sorting through the lesson materials, he said, I didn't know this room was empty before. You never came up here, she said. No, he said, I didn't. He was quiet for a moment. I do now. That evening they sat by the fire and talked the way they had found, slowly and at real effort, how to talk. Without agenda, without performance, the conversation finding its own shape. She was reading. He was watching the fire. At some point he said, without particular preamble, that he had been thinking about what she had told him on her 3rd visit to Clementine's, about not going quiet again. I want you to know, he said, that I am not asking you to make it easier for me to be better at this. I am asking you to keep telling me when I am not. She looked up from her book. I will, she said. She meant it precisely as much as she said it. Outside, the winter held the city in its usual cold, and the streets were quiet, and somewhere 14 miles north a farmhouse sat in the dark, with a lamp still burning in the window, because Clementine Birch kept country hours and went to bed late, and because she had a habit, which she would never admit to, of sitting up until she knew the people she loved were settled. Tess would be back in the morning. There was a new primer waiting on the desk. The schoolroom had 7 chairs and would need more by spring, and Cressida had already written to a carpenter in the city about the cost of building 4 additional ones, and the letter was sealed and ready to go. She was not the woman who had walked into that dining room 3 years and 4 months ago, new to this city, and genuinely hopeful about the thing she was beginning. She was not the woman who had packed 2 trunks at midnight and driven north through the October dark. She was the woman who had been both of those people, who had looked at what each of them had cost her, and who had decided, deliberately, clearly, without reservation, that this particular fire in this particular room, with this particular man who was learning, slowly and at real cost, how to deserve what he had been given was worth the choosing. She had chosen it with her eyes open. And that, she thought, turning the page, was the only kind of choosing that had ever been worth anything at all.